install the hydraulic lash adjusters into their bores in the cylinder head. Apply the specified GM lubricant to the valve tips. Position the roller followers on the tip of the valve stem and on the lash adjuster. Note that used roller followers must be returned to the original position on the camshaft. If the camshaft is being replaced, the roller followers actuated by the camshaft must also be replaced. Lubricate with the specified lubricant. Rotate the oil seal in the groove of the number 1 camshaft journal so the split line is at approximately the 12 o'clock position before installing the camshaft caps. Set the exhaust camshaft on top of the roller followers in the camshaft bearing journals. Install the camshaft with the notch on the front at approximately the 7 o'clock position. Inspect the camshaft caps and measure to ensure they are within specifications. Install the exhaust camshaft caps. Hand tighten the camshaft cap bolts in increments of 3 turns until they are seated. Tighten to specifications. Install the intake camshaft with the notch at the 5 o'clock position. Finish the installation following the same procedure as you did for the exhaust camshaft. To install the rear bearing cap, start by applying a 2.5 mm bead of sealer to the cylinder head mating surface. Note, to prevent oil leaks, it is important to follow the bead path when applying the sealer, as called out in service information. Install the cap bolts to specification. Ensure the bearing rear cap and cylinder head alignment is correct and the mating surfaces are flush. Install the intake and exhaust camshaft position actuator solenoid valves. Tighten to specification. Remove all excess sealing material from the fuel pump roller lifter bore and the fuel pump assembly sealing surface. Ensure the bore is free of debris. Do not allow any excess sealing material to remain within the cylinder head or on any sealing surface. Verify the seal on the cylinder head plate is intact and in good condition. Ensure the opening plate sealing surface is clean and free of excess sealing material. Then install the rear cylinder head opening plate and tighten the bolts to specification. Next, install the water pump assembly by hand tightening the bolts. Then tighten the bolts to specification. Insert the bushing onto the balance shaft bushing installing tool and insert the tool into the block. Seat the balance shaft into the bore using the specified tools. When the installer is fully seated in the engine block, the bushing is fully seated. Remove the tool. Lubricate the balance shaft lobes with engine oil and install the exhaust and intake balance shafts into their proper bores. Tighten the bolts to specification. Next, install the crankshaft drive sprocket. Then install the balance shaft drive chain. Note that there are 2 links of matching colors and 1 of a unique color. Place the uniquely colored link so that it lines up with the timing mark on the intake side balance shaft sprocket. Working clockwise around the chain, place the first matching colored link in line with the timing mark on the crankshaft drive sprocket. Place the chain on the water pump drive sprocket. Align the last matching colored link with the timing mark on the exhaust side balance shaft drive sprocket. Next, install the upper balance shaft chain guide and bolts and tighten to specification. Install the small balance shaft chain guide and tighten the bolts to specification. Install the adjustable balance shaft chain guide and tighten the bolts to specification. Reset the timing chain tension by turning the tensioner plunger 90 degrees in its bore and compress the plunger. Then turn the tensioner back to the original 12 o'clock position and insert a paper clip through the hole in the plunger body and into the hole in the tensioner plunger. Install the timing chain tensioner and tighten the bolts to specification. Remove the paper clip from the balance shaft drive chain tensioner. There are other balance shaft chains that use anodized links. The link located between the different colored links would line up on the intake sprocket. To install the valve timing chain, ensure the intake camshaft notch is in the 5 o'clock position and the exhaust camshaft notch is in the 7 o'clock position. The number 1 piston should be at top dead center, as indicated by the crankshaft key at the 12 o'clock position. Install the friction washer if equipped and the timing chain drive sprocket, ensuring the timing mark is in the 5 o'clock position and facing outwards. Then install a second friction washer if equipped. Install the timing chain onto the intake camshaft actuator with the timing mark lined up with the anodized link located between the 2 light-colored links. Lower the timing chain through the opening of the cylinder head. Make sure that the chain goes around both sides of the cylinder block bosses. Install the intake camshaft actuator onto the intake camshaft while aligning the dowel pin into the camshaft slot. Hand tighten a new intake camshaft actuator bolt. Route the timing chain around the crankshaft sprocket and line up the first matching anodized link with the timing mark on the crankshaft sprocket. Rotate the crankshaft clockwise to remove all of the chain slack. Do not rotate the intake camshaft. Install the timing chain guide down through the cylinder head and tighten the bolts to specification. Install the camshaft actuator onto the timing chain with the timing mark lined up with the third anodized link. Install the exhaust camshaft actuator onto the exhaust camshaft, aligning the dowel pin into the camshaft slot. Using an open-end wrench, rotate the exhaust camshaft clockwise until the dowel pin in the camshaft actuator goes into the camshaft slot. When the actuator seats on the cam, hand tighten the new exhaust camshaft actuator bolt. Verify all of the anodized links and the appropriate timing marks are still aligned. Install the fixed timing chain guide and tighten it to specification. Install the upper timing chain guide and tighten it to specification. Reset the timing chain tensioner by removing the snap ring and then remove the piston assembly from the body of the timing chain tensioner. Install the specified tensioner tool into a vise. Install the notch end of the piston assembly into the specified tensioner tool. Using the tensioner tool, turn the ratchet cylinder into the piston. Reinstall the piston assembly into the body of the tensioner and then install the snap ring. Inspect the timing chain tensioner seal for damage. If damage is found, replace the seal. Inspect to ensure all dirt and debris is removed from the timing chain tensioner's threaded hole in the cylinder head. Install the timing chain tensioner assembly and tighten it to specification. The timing chain tensioner is released by compressing it to 2 millimeters or 79 thousandths of an inch, which will release the locking mechanism in the ratchet. This has to be done after the balancer is installed. There are different styles of timing chains that have unique timing marks. The unique link will always be placed on the intake camshaft actuator timing mark. The other timing marks will align with the timing marks on the other sprockets. Refer to service information for details. Install the specified camshaft actuator locking tool and tighten the bolts to specification. Torque both the intake and exhaust camshaft actuator bolts and remove the camshaft actuator locking tool. Install the timing chain oiling nozzle and tighten it to specifications. With sealant applied to the threads of the timing chain guide bolt access hole plug, install the plug and torque to specification. Next, install the seal into the front cover by driving it in using the specified camshaft front main seal installer. Be sure the engine front cover is properly supported when installing the seal. Next, install the engine front cover with a new gasket. Install the engine front cover bolts and tighten to specifications. Note that the center bolt should be tightened last. Apply a 2.25 mm bead of sealer on the level part of the flange next to the chamfer around the perimeter of the oil pan and the oil suction port opening. Install the oil pan. Following the proper installation sequence, torque the oil pan bolts to specification. Next, install the specified crankshaft balancer guide into the end of the crankshaft. Install the balancer into the guide. Use care to properly align the keyway and flats on the balancer with the oil pump drive. Ensure both components are aligned correctly or serious engine damage will occur. Remove the guide. Install the specified crankshaft balancer holder. Install a new retaining bolt and washer. Use the crankshaft balancer holder and a breaker bar to prevent the crankshaft from rotating when tightening the bolt to specification. With the camshaft actuator locking tool installed, release the timing chain tensioner by applying 45 Newton meters or 33 foot-pounds counterclockwise torque to the crankshaft balancer bolt. Then remove the camshaft actuator locking tool. With new seals installed, assemble the camshaft cover and a new gasket. Ensure that the gasket is located in the retaining groove in the camshaft cover. Install the cover on the cylinder head and hand start the bolts. Then tighten the bolts to specification. Install the ignition coil to specification. Install the front and rear lift brackets. Next, install a new oil filter and the filter cap. Next, inspect the fuel rail. Then remove and discard the fuel injector retainer by supporting the fuel rail along the bottom at the widest point. Note that you should always support or hold the fuel injector at the widest point. Do not hold the tip or connector. Remove the injector from the fuel rail by pulling the injector straight out along the fuel injector axis. Slight rotation of the fuel injector is acceptable, but do not twist excessively during removal. Remove and discard the fuel injector seals. Remove the fuel injector bushing by pushing it straight off at the bushing tab. Then remove the fuel injector O-ring and plastic spacers. After cleaning the fuel rail and injectors with solvent, inspect the fuel rail and components for damage, debris, or restrictions. Replace the fuel rail and injectors if any damage is found. Do not attempt to repair a fuel rail or injectors. Install the white spacer on the injector, then the brown spacer. Do not reverse the order of the plastic spacers. Lubricate the new O-ring with 5W30 engine oil and install the O-ring on the injector. Install a new fuel injector bushing onto the fuel injector. The bushing should seat with a distinct snap sound and feel. Install the fuel injector into the fuel rail. Ensure the injector is aligned with the fuel rail flanges and that it is fully seated in the fuel rail and no gaps are present. Using the specified installer, install the fuel injector retainer. Ensure the retainer is seated properly in the installer. The notch should always face forward. The retainer should be behind the plate. Note that the tool windows allow for visual alignment. Inspect each installed fuel injector and ensure the retainer is fully seated on the fuel rail and fuel injector bushing flanges. The flanges on each side and at the top of the fuel injector should seat completely into the window on the retainer. Failure to completely install the retainers may degrade fuel injection system performance or cause a system malfunction. Connect the electrical connection to the fuel rail and then connect the fuel rail harness connectors to the fuel injectors. Install the specified long protector onto the fuel injector tip, covering the first recessed area closest to the tip. Place a new seal on the long protector. Do not use any type of lubricant when installing the new seals on the fuel injector tip. Using the specified pusher, install the seal into the second recessed area of the injector. Compress the seal with your fingers and then resize using the specified sizer. Note that the sizer is two-sided and either direction will size the seal correctly. Install the specified short protector onto the injector tip and install a new seal into the first recessed area of the fuel injector using the same method as the previous seal.